everyone, my name is Kelly Richter, and today I'm going to be making the honey whole wheat bread on page 47 of Cookwise. And the purpose of my experiment is to test the differences between mechanical kneading and mixing and doing it by hand. So I'm going to make two identical loaves of bread, but I'm going to use this bread maker to do the mixing and kneading of one, and I'm going to do the other by hand. So here are the ingredients I'm using according to the recipe in Cookwise. I've got a whole wheat and a bread flour. Both are the King Arthur brand. I've got Carnation non-fat instant dry milk, Fleischmann's active dry yeast, a flaky sea salt, and I'll explain why I use that later, Kretschmer wheat germ, and a store brand vitamin C tablet, honey, and eggs. So I've added hot water from the tap to both batches of yeast. It's about 120 coming out of the tap, and we've got some bubbles, so looks like it's alive and well. Okay, so there's the bread machine mixing one loaf, and I'm mixing this other by hand. It's getting pretty thick and sticky. I'll mix these for about 4 or 5 minutes according to the recipe. So I forgot to mention that I'm going to be using the sponge method, where I add part of the flour to the wet ingredients like the yeast solution and milk, and this sponge is going to sit for about between 30 minutes and 2.5 hours, and as the yeast is reacting, and it's just going to add a lot of flavor to the dough. So these are both mixed up, and we'll let them sit. Currently the sponge is about 78 degrees, and I was curious to see what it would be after it sits for a while. Okay, so the yeast has been working for about an hour now. The temperature has stayed the same. I really expected it to rise, but the dough is a lot puffier, there's bubbles. So now I'm going to add the rest of the ingredients and get both of these kneading. So I've added the honey, egg yolk, vitamin C, and salt. And I'm going to add the rest of the wheat flour and some crushed ice. And if you recall from the book, she suggests that you should add crushed ice before you knead, since the temperature will rise when that happens, and the crushed ice will end it at a temperature that's more favorable for gluten formation. Also, I added the flaky sea salt because it just incorporates a little better than granular salt. Okay, so when hand kneading, it was kind of hard to incorporate all the rest of the flour, but I'm doing my best. It's pretty sticky. I have some flour here on the counter, and I added a little water just because the dough is very dry at first. So I'm going to knead these both for about 5 minutes. There's dough going in the machine right now while I do this by hand. It looks pretty ugly, but we'll see how it turns out. Okay, so here is the hand kneaded dough. It's pretty stretchy and elastic, and it has all the ingredients including the wheat germ mixed in now. And here is the machine kneaded. They seem to have pretty similar elasticity, so that's encouraging. So now that these are all mixed up, I'm going to cover them in plastic wrap and let them rise for about 1.5 hours or until they double in volume. Okay, so now the bread has risen for about 1 hour and 10 minutes, and they've both risen really well, it looks like. Another source that I read, not really in our books but just on the internet, gave a test to tell if it was done rising, and that was you insert 2 fingers, and if the indentation stays for a couple of seconds and it's done rising. As you can see, I've done that on both loaves and the indentation stayed put. So I think these are done. So I'm going to just punch them down a little. You can hear all the air being pushed out of them. You can even see some big bubbles there. Okay, so now I'm gonna shape them just a little bit and put them on the plastic wrap to rest for 15 minutes before shaping. Looks pretty good. This is my hand kneaded dough, by the way. There's a little pocket of wheat germ there. So side by side comparison, they look pretty similar at this point. Okay, so now that these loaves have rested for a little bit, it's time to shape them. I'm a little iffy about this part, but I guess it doesn't have to be perfect. Pretty good. Okay. This one's a little fat. Okay, so here are my shaped loaves. The one that was mixed and kneaded by hand is on the left, and the one that was machine mixed is on the right. There's still, this one's a lot smoother, and this one was a little harder to stretch out. It's a little tougher. Okay, so now I'm going to brush the egg over them, and then they're going to do the second and final rise for about an hour until they are coming up over the pan. Okay, so now that the loaves have doubled in size, I'm going to put the last egg wash on, and I'm going to sprinkle some oats on there just for a little bit of decoration. And then I'm going to put them in the oven. I'm a little worried about how big some of these bubbles are. I'm worried that they'll make big holes in my bread, but It's a little late now. We'll see how it turns out. So the loaves are about ready to go into the oven. It's preheated and I'm letting some steam build up in it right now. I've sprinkled some oats on the top and the egg wash helped them stick really well. I hope that's the case throughout the baking process. As you can see, the one on the right, it's a lot more rounded and smooth. That's the one that was machine kneaded, and the one on the left is a little irregular and didn't rise as well. So it's kind of looking as if machine kneading helped make more regular gluten sheets. So we've got the stone in there, and hopefully the steam is going to give our bread a nice and crispy crust. So get the bread breaking and baking, and for about 45 minutes we'll check back in on it. So here they are out of the oven, right at 200 degrees in the middle, indicating that they're finished. They've got a really nice brown crust from the egg wash, and I'm going to let them cool before I cut into them and see how the texture is, so we'll wait a while on that. Okay, so I have sliced into both of the loaves now. They smell really great, really yeasty, and I think you can see from this picture that there's not really a lot of difference between the two as far as texture and the size of the holes. Overall, I don't really know that kneading with a machine was much better, except that it was a lot smoother on top. It made a prettier loaf. You can see the one on the left is kind of lumpy. So I guess kneading with a machine does give a smoother loaf. They turned out pretty, I think, but the crust is a little bit too toasty for my liking. So maybe I could have taken it out a little earlier. But overall, I think they turned out well.